After she gave birth, her unfaithful husband flat out refused to sign the birth certificate. "That bastard is trash. He doesn't deserve my last name," he yelled, humiliating her in front of his entire affluent family. He turned pale and began to tremble, however, when the doctor spoke. "They say the worst kind of pain isn't physical. It's the kind that shatters you internally while everyone stares, judges, and applauds your downfall." And that was exactly what Zola lived through. Zola Akani was 26 years old. She worked at a small community library in the heart of the historic 3rd Ward district of Houston, Texas. Zola had always been a quiet woman, reserved, a bit timid, but with a gentle spirit that could warm up any room. Despite her humble roots, she earned the affection of everyone she knew through her dedication, her honesty, and her peculiar habit of speaking softly, as if she didn't want to bother anyone. She fell in love with Kofi Dumont when she was barely 22. He, the heir to a prestigious family known for their legacy in real estate and philanthropy in the South, swept into her life like a hurricane, disguised as a soft breeze. Kofi carried himself with confidence, flashed a dazzling smile, and spoke in words that sounded like eternal promises, promises that, over time, twisted into threats masked by silence. That public hospital, with its scent of cheap disinfectant and the echo of newborns crying, became the setting for a nightmare no one saw coming. Zola had been in labor for over 8 hours, alone, her hands clutching the sheets, her heart in shreds. Her mother, who was battling a terminal illness, couldn't be there. Her girlfriends from the neighborhood couldn't find a way to make the long trip. And Kofi? Well, Kofi arrived when everything was already done. The room was cramped, with scuffed walls and a blinding white light that hurt the eyes. Zola held her baby, her own eyes still swollen from crying so much. When the door opened, Kofi strode in, dressed in designer clothes, his hair perfectly coiffed, looking as if he'd just come from a gala dinner. Behind him were his mother, Mrs. Odette Dumont, with an arrogant gaze and a look of sheer contempt, and his younger sister Nala, who looked at Zola as if she were a cockroach crawling across the Persian rug in their study. "You're late," Zola murmured, barely having the strength to speak, clutching the small child in her arms. Kofi didn't answer. He took one step, then another, until his eyes landed on the baby. He stopped dead, his brow furrowing. Something in his face shifted. It was no longer just discomfort. It was cold, calculating, poisonous rage. "What is this?" he said, not raising his voice, but with an intensity that chilled the blood in the room. Zola looked at him, confused. "It's your son, Kofi. Our son." Mrs. Odette advanced with determined steps and positioned herself next to her son. She looked at Kofi, then at the child. Her lips curled with disdain. "That is not a Dumont." Nala let out a short, nervous, mocking laugh. "Zola, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything." Zola began to tremble. "The baby is yours, Kofi." But Kofi was no longer listening to her. He spun around toward the nurse who had just entered to check the vital signs. "I need to speak with the hospital administrator. I refuse to sign any birth certificate. That bastard will not carry my name." The words fell like knives into Zola's body. The nurse, visibly uncomfortable, tried to slip out of the room. Zola clung to the baby, her eyes filled with tears, not from the public humiliation, but from the pain that swelled in her chest like a bomb about to explode. "How can you say that? He is your son. Kofi, look at me, please," she begged, her voice broken. Kofi looked at her for the first time since he had entered, but not as a husband, as if she were a complete stranger. "Do you think I'm stupid? That child looks nothing like me. Do you think I'm going to bear the burden of a mistake that isn't even mine? He is not a mistake. He is your son. Don't raise your voice at me," he shouted, pointing his finger at her. "What you did is unforgivable. You have no idea what you've just caused." Mrs. Odette crossed her arms and approached Zola with a look full of contempt. "I always knew you were an opportunist, a poor girl looking to climb the ladder with a swollen belly. And look at you now. You don't even know who the father is." "Shut up!" Zola screamed, trembling with anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't you speak to my mother like that!" Kofi slammed his hand against the wall. "And you, Zola, what you did is not forgivable. You messed with my family." The baby began to cry, a loud wail, as if sensing the tension, as if knowing something was deeply wrong in that place. Zola cradled him, trying to soothe him while she was dissolving inside. The noise drew a doctor, who entered with a worried expression. It was Dr. Ahmadi, the attending physician for the delivery. Tall, with graying temples and tired eyes, he stopped when he saw the scene. "Is everything all right here?" "Of course not," Kofi snapped. "This woman is pinning a child on me that isn't mine. I want proof. I will not allow a false paternity to be attributed to me." The doctor looked at Zola, then at the child. He paused for a long time. He took a deep breath. "Mr. Dumont, I need to speak with you privately. I have nothing to discuss. I'm clear. That child isn't mine. I have no interest in hearing more." "Please," the doctor insisted. "It's important." Kofi ignored him, crossed his arms, and turned to his mother. "We're leaving. Let her deal with her own problem." Zola tried to sit up, but the post-labor pain made her fall back onto the bed. "Don't go, please! Listen to me! Kofi!" Mrs. Odette approached one last time. "I hope you have a good story to tell that child when he asks who his father was." And they left. Nala threw one last look at Zola, neither pity nor hatred, just emptiness. The doctor closed the door gently and walked toward the bed. Zola was shattered. The baby, still crying, clung to his mother's warmth. "Zola," the doctor said, lowering his voice, "you need to be strong. What I am about to tell you is not easy." She lifted her face, soaked with tears. "What is it?" The doctor paused. He looked at the baby, then back at her. The reason why Kofi sensed something strange makes sense. The baby has a genetic condition that is not compatible with his, but also not compatible with yours. Zola blinked, confused. "What are you saying?" "We need to run more tests, but Zola, the child's father appears to be someone close to Kofi, very close." Zola frowned. Her heart skipped a beat. "No, that can't be. I was not with anyone else. Never." The doctor stood up awkwardly and moved toward the door. "I will tell you with more certainty as soon as I have the lab results. For now, rest. You'll need it." He left the room. Zola was left alone in silence. The baby's cries softened. The pain in her belly was bearable, but what was in her soul was another kind of wound, one that had no name, no cure, and no end yet. She didn't know that hell was just beginning. She couldn't imagine that the truth she was about to discover was worse than any lie. Zola couldn't move. She felt as if the entire weight of the world had fallen onto her chest. The silence in the room was so thick you could cut it with a sigh. The doctor was gone. Kofi had abandoned her, and her son, little Keon, slept on her chest with the innocence of someone who hasn't yet known contempt. Hours passed like shadows dragging on in the early morning. Zola didn't close her eyes once. She stared at the ceiling, unable to comprehend what had just happened. She repeated over and over that it couldn't be true, that it was all a nightmare, that the pain would stop, but it wouldn't. The pain clung to her chest like a rusty knife, and the worst part wasn't the humiliation, it was the doubt. The doctor's words echoed in her mind like a cursed sound, an incompatible genetic condition. How could that be? She had never been unfaithful to Kofi. Not a single glance, not a single touch with another man. Never. And yet, there was her son being rejected by everyone, even by his own father or the man she thought was his father. At dawn, the nurse entered with a tired expression. She brought a tray with breakfast and a form. "Zola, honey, you need to sign this paperwork for discharge. Do you have someone who can come pick you up?" Zola shook her head. "No, I don't have anyone." The nurse sighed with that silent compassion that only those who have witnessed too many tragedies possess. You can stay a few more hours, but the hospital is short on beds. You'll have to leave when you can." Zola nodded, then looked at her son. "I don't have anywhere to take him." 2 days later, she returned to the small neighborhood where she had grown up. Dirt roads, corrugated iron roofs, the smell of dampness and simple soul food scents filling the air with nostalgia. The inherited house from her mother awaited her, in ruins, with broken windows and no running water. Zola entered with Keon in her arms and took a deep breath. It wasn't a mansion, but at least no one would judge her in here. She thought about crying, but she had no tears left. In the Dumont mansion, meanwhile, everything was tense. Kofi had called Dr. Amadi to demand an explanation. "What do you mean by incompatible? Explain yourself clearly," he demanded, pacing his office with a glass of bourbon in his hand and his eyes burning. The doctor on the phone remained calm. "Mr. Dumont, as I explained at the clinic, we detected an uncommon genetic condition. It matches a relative of yours, but not you." "Are you suggesting it was someone in my family?" "I cannot make assertions without proof. I suggest a DNA test as soon as possible." Kofi hung up without responding. He then looked out the window. His face tightened. He began to suspect. The chauffeur who always smiled too much, the gardener who once asked about Zola in a curious tone. Even his own younger brother, Ose, a 20-year-old who spent too much time at the house when he wasn't there. Mrs. Odette walked in at that moment, elegant, with that air of superiority she never shed, not even for sleep. "Well, I'm arranging a DNA test. I want to put an end to this. That woman, I always knew she wasn't trustworthy. It showed in her clothes, in the way she talked. That kind of woman only serves to ruin a good name." Kofi clenched his fists. "I want all the staff investigated. Everyone. I will not allow anyone to tarnish my name." Meanwhile, Zola was trying to survive. She had no formula for the baby, no diapers, and her savings account had been frozen. Kofi had cut her off from everything, even the health insurance. She went to the neighborhood corner store to ask for credit, but no one would help her. "Zola, I'm sorry, but you already owe me from last month, and with what people are saying about you, I'd rather not get involved in trouble," the store owner said, looking down. Zola left the business with her dignity in tatters, but just as she crossed the street corner, an older woman called her from the doorway of a house with rusty iron bars. "Hey, Zola, come here, girl. Come on in. You and your baby look like you haven't eaten." It was Mrs. Coretta, a lifelong neighbor, a widow, and mother of 7 grown children who no longer lived with her. She received Zola with a cup of hot tea, some hard bread, and a look of genuine affection that Zola hadn't received in a long time. "I don't know what you did, but whatever it is, that baby ain't to blame, and you need some help." Zola broke down in tears for the first time since leaving the hospital. She cried like a small child. She wept over the wooden table with Keon sleeping on her lap and Mrs. Coretta stroking her hair. "I don't understand," she whispered through sobs. "I swear to God I wasn't with anyone else. I don't know what's happening." That night, when she tried to sleep, she had a blurred memory, a fleeting, stabbing image, a glass of wine, a strange dizziness. Kofi wasn't there. She only remembered being in the house. Then everything was a fog. She tried to recall more, but the sensation was like a choked scream. Something didn't add up. The next day, comments exploded on social media. Someone had leaked a photo of Kofi leaving the hospital with his mother and sister. The caption read, "Multimillionaire rejects his own son at birth." Opinions were divided. Some defended him, others crucified him. But everyone was talking. The press began to sniff around. A young journalist, Savannah Jones, tracked Zola down. She knocked on Mrs. Coretta's door 2 days later. "Are you Zola Akani?" Zola hesitated, but nodded. "I want to tell your story, but only if you want me to. The country deserves to know the truth." Zola didn't answer. She looked at her son. The world was cruel, but perhaps telling her story was the only way to protect him. In the Dumont mansion, Kofi received the DNA test results. He was alone. He opened the envelope with trembling hands and read it. He stopped, read it again. Negative. The baby was not his. He felt as if something inside him had fractured. It wasn't sadness. It was fury, raw rage. He called his attorney and asked him to destroy the provisional birth certificate they had started. "That child is dead to me," he said, throwing the envelope into the fireplace fire. Hours later, in an elegant lounge in downtown Dallas, Kofi was laughing with a young, perfectly made-up blonde woman named Camille. He was at a gathering of executives. No one mentioned Zola, no one mentioned Keon, just drinks, fake laughter, and bodies trying to fill empty spaces. Meanwhile, Zola began her job search. With Keon in her arms and a resume stained by rumors, she scoured offices, bakeries, and stores. Everyone said the same thing. "I'm sorry, we're not hiring." Night fell. She returned home exhausted, her feet swollen, with nothing more than a bag of rice that Mrs. Coretta had given her. As she entered, she found an unsigned letter slipped under the door. It only said, "He wasn't the only one in that house who looked at you differently." Zola felt a chill. She looked at her son, hugged him tight, then closed the door and drew the curtains. There were too many shadows surrounding her story, and she was just beginning to understand that behind every silence lay a secret. Zola hadn't slept peacefully since receiving that anonymous letter. The phrase echoed in her mind like a curse. He wasn't the only one in that house who looked at you differently. She felt fear, real fear. Not of ghosts or superstitions, but of what she remembered and what she didn't. Of what might have happened that night when everything became a fog, and the following days were shrouded in silence. The baby started to cry. Zola held him close. Keon was only a few weeks old, but his eyes seemed to look with the intensity of someone who had already lived 1,000 lives. She stroked his hair and sang softly. Then she sat on the edge of the broken bed in that borrowed house, Mrs. Coretta's home, now her only refuge. The world had left her alone, but time didn't stop. Neither did hunger. That very night, she made a decision. She went out with Keon wrapped in a thin blanket, walked through the neighborhood with her head held high, and went straight to an office building in the industrial park. The place smelled of old sweat and cheap bleach. She asked for the cleaning supervisor. "I need a job. Anything. I only ask that you let me bring my son with me." The boss looked at her suspiciously. "This isn't a daycare." "He won't bother anyone. He'll sleep in a corner. I just need a chance." The woman sighed. She was tired and needed someone urgently. "All right, but if he cries too much, you're gone. I don't want trouble." That night, Zola mopped marble floors with swollen hands. Keon slept in a box with a folded sheet as a mattress. Every time she finished pushing the mop, she rushed over to check that he was breathing. Her body ached, but her dignity hurt more. With every corner she cleaned, she felt like she was erasing a piece of her history. She was no longer the wife of Kofi Dumont. She was nobody. Days passed. Keon started showing strange symptoms: shortness of breath, a constant fever, and small tremors in his hands. Zola took him to a community clinic in the neighborhood. The doctor, young and serious, examined him in silence. "We need to run more complete tests. This could be something more serious." Zola looked at him in terror. "More serious? How?" "It could be a neurological or metabolic condition. I don't want to alarm you without proof, but there are signs we can't ignore." "And how much do those tests cost?" The doctor hesitated. $5,000, maybe $6,000. It all depends on what's needed. Zola felt the air ripped from her lungs. She didn't have even $100. That night, she didn't eat. She sold her only ring, the one Kofi had given her when he promised her a good life. She exchanged it for 2 cans of formula and 1 pound of rice. The next day, she went to the local legal aid office, a room with damp walls and piled-up papers. A young lawyer, Imani Grant, attended to her. She had dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze was sharp. She listened to Zola's story without interruption. "I want to force my son's father to take responsibility." Imani took notes. "Do you have the birth certificate?" Zola lowered her head. He destroyed it. He said that child didn't deserve his name. Imani looked at her seriously. We're going to start with a paternity and child support lawsuit. Do you have proof you were married? Zola pulled out a torn folder. It held a photo from her wedding, a simple copy of the marriage license, and a couple of utility bills in both their names. This will work for now, but you need an official genetic exam. Zola swallowed. They already did one. It came back negative. He said the child wasn't his. Imani raised her eyebrows. And are you sure you weren't with anyone else? Zola lifted her wounded gaze. I don't remember anything. Just one night I felt strange, like something wasn't right. But I didn't do anything. The lawyer nodded. She didn't ask more questions. Some things hurt more than a test result. I'm going to help you. I don't promise miracles, but I promise justice. In the Dumont mansion, the atmosphere had grown heavy. The press was starting to apply pressure. Some outlets wanted to know why a baby had been publicly rejected by such an influential family. Social media was unforgiving. The Dumont name was becoming synonymous with scandal. Kofi, desperate to clean up his image, ordered a media control campaign. He bought headlines, silenced local news outlets, and hired digital reputation experts. But inside the house, the tension couldn't be concealed. Mr. Sterling Dumont, Kofi's father, had returned from a business trip, always elegant, always with his measured smile. He was one of those men who didn't yell, but whose single glance could make an entire room tremble. Kofi met him in the study. Father, I need to know if anyone in the family did anything with Zola. Mr. Dumont stared at him. What are you referring to? You know what I mean. She claims she wasn't with anyone. The DNA doesn't match me, but the doctor says there's compatibility with someone close. Did you see something, Sterling? Mr. Dumont maintained his composure. Your weakness is making you talk nonsense. Stop finding excuses for your marital failure. That woman doesn't deserve another minute of our time. Kofi swallowed. You can't ignore it. Something doesn't add up. Osei was here when I wasn't. The chauffeur was too. Mr. Dumont interrupted him in a firm voice. Don't bring your brother into this. He's just a child. If you were naive enough to let an outsider into this family, assume the consequences. From the doorway, Osei listened in silence. He then went downstairs and found his mother, Mrs. Odette, and said in a low voice, Mom, do you remember Aaliyah? Mrs. Odette immediately tensed up. Why are you mentioning that woman? Because Dad has worse secrets than the Zola business. You know it. What he did to Aaliyah was worse. But everyone fell silent. Mrs. Odette turned pale. Be quiet. Don't you dare talk about that. That story died years ago. Osei shook his head. No, it didn't die. It was just buried, like everything else in this house. That night, Zola took Kian to a private clinic that offered pro bono consultations. The same doctor who had seen her at the public hospital, Dr. Ahmadi, attended to him. He was surprised to see her there but didn't say anything. After examining Kian closely, he sat across from Zola with a grave expression. The child has a mitochondrial disorder. It's a rare inherited condition. It affects cellular energy and neurological development. It's progressive. Zola felt herself faint. He could die? Not if we act fast, but the treatment is costly and long. How much? The doctor hesitated. More than $15,000. Just to start. Zola didn't respond. She just hugged her son. I don't have that money. There's another option. If we find a compatible relative, we could start an alternative therapy. Zola looked up. A compatible relative? We need to analyze the DNA of the possible fathers. If we find someone with a specific genetic match, we could work with that. Zola closed her eyes. She felt the world spin. She remembered everything, the rejection, the abandonment, the contempt. What if the only compatible person is in a family that hates me? The doctor looked at her with compassion. Then you'll have to decide whether you face that hatred or let the silence consume everything. That night, in her small room, Zola watched Kian while he slept. Next to her was the envelope with the genetic results she had requested with Amani's help. She opened it with trembling hands, reading it word for word. The result was not the same as the one from the hospital. The new report said something more. There was a match, but not with Kofi, with another member of the Dumont family. Zola let the paper fall. The world went dark, and for the first time, she felt that her story was just the surface of a much deeper abyss. Because if what that paper said was true, then the real father of her son was not just someone close to Kofi. He was someone who had destroyed many lives before hers. Zola let the envelope fall to the floor without a sound, but the impact was as real as if the world had exploded inside that small room. The air became thick, unbreathable. The image of Mr. Sterling Dumont appeared in her mind like an old shadow. Elegant, with that refined smile that hid something dark, something she hadn't wanted to see. The genetic match left no doubt. It wasn't a supposition. It was data. Kian's true father lived behind the picture windows of a mansion she had once called home and carried the same last name. Zola pressed Kian against her chest, as if the warmth of her body could shield him from what was coming. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She stayed still, feeling an emptiness she didn't know how to fill. For the first time, she wasn't just a victim of abandonment, but of the complicit silence of an entire family. And that silence, she understood now, was the cruelest enemy. That very night, she requested a meeting with Imani, the lawyer who was helping her. "I didn't want to believe it, but I can't keep quiet anymore," she said, placing the envelope with the results on the small office table. Imani read it in silence. She didn't blink. She didn't say anything for long seconds. "Sterling Dumont," she murmured at last. Zola nodded, her gaze vacant. "What are you going to do?" Imani asked. Zola didn't answer immediately, then lifted her head. "I'm going to see Mrs. Odette. She knows. She always knew." The next day, she showed up at the mansion unannounced. The gate attendant hesitated, but seeing her firm face, carrying her son, he let her pass. She walked across the immaculate lawn, through the hallways she once traversed with dreams, until she reached the main living room. Mrs. Odette was sitting, having tea with her sister. Seeing Zola, she twisted her lips. "The nerve of you to show up here after all the damage you caused this family." Zola was unfazed. "I need to speak with you, alone." Mrs. Odette's sister stood up without saying a word. The tension filled the air. The matriarch slowly set her teacup down on the saucer. "You have 5 minutes. I'm not here about your son. I'm here about yours, the other one." Mrs. Odette blinked. The silence turned icy. "I know that the true father of my son is Sterling. I have confirmation, and you knew it." "What are you implying?" she tried to say, but Zola interrupted her. "I'm not implying, I'm stating it, and you are going to help me because this isn't just about me." Mrs. Odette stood up. Her hands trembled, barely perceptibly. "You don't know what you're saying. You have no idea what it means to accuse a man like my husband." Zola didn't back down. "And Aaliyah didn't know what she was doing when she screamed either, or was she also silenced with money?" Mrs. Odette's eyes flew open. That name, that memory that had been locked away like a corpse in the depths of her mind. "How do you know that name?" "Osi mentioned it. And there's a pattern. Your husband is not new to this, and your silence makes you complicit." Mrs. Odette took a step back, staggering. Then she sank into the armchair, as if the weight of years of secrets had crushed her. Aaliyah was a young girl who worked here. One day she disappeared. They said she left without warning, but I knew it wasn't true. I saw her cry. I saw her bruises. I saw how she avoided Sterling. I knew, but I was afraid. Sterling warned me that if I spoke, he would destroy everything. My children, me. And I believed him because he always follows through on his threats. And that's why you allowed him to repeat the same thing with me? Mrs. Odette bowed her head. Silence was her answer. That night, Zola and Imani investigated Aaliyah. There were no recent records, only a police report for voluntary disappearance, closed months later due to lack of evidence. Imani connected to a medical database. It took hours until they found something. A patient named Aaliyah Dominguez. Diagnosis: unspecified psychosis. Hospitalized in a private clinic outside the city. A psychiatric clinic, Zola said in disbelief. Forced confinement. If she's been there ever since, she's been institutionalized for more than 4 years. This is no accident. They decided to go the next day. Imani made the arrangements. She used her lawyer title to gain access, though only for a superficial visit. They couldn't reveal the real reasons yet. Zola waited in the car. From the window, she watched nurses, doctors, and patients walking in circles. The place had high gates and cameras on every corner. It wasn't a hospital. It was a white prison. Imani returned after an hour, her eyes cloudy. She doesn't speak. She doesn't move. She's sedated all the time. She has marks on her arms, as if she tried to... She couldn't finish the sentence. Zola lowered her head. The air became heavy. She's alive, but she's no longer free, just like me. That same week, a journalist who had been following the case for some time published a filtered audio clip. It was an old recording, undated, without context. An anguished female voice could be heard screaming, "He drugged me! I didn't want to! I couldn't move! Please help me!" Social media exploded. Some said it was fake. Others swore they recognized the voice. Imani managed to trace the origin. It was part of a series of medical files from the same clinic where Aaliyah was. Someone who no longer worked there had sold the audio for money. Zola listened to the audio 3 times. The 3rd time, her blood ran cold. It was her voice. Imani understood it too. She didn't say anything. She just looked at her. Kofi in his office listened to it for the first time on his phone via an anonymous link. He put it on speaker. When he heard that scream, that broken tone, that desperation, he felt something inside him snap. He closed his eyes, visualizing the memory. The night he left for a business trip. He was going overseas, and before leaving, he told his father that Zola would be alone in the house. Dad was that night alone with her. The glass he was holding fell to the floor and shattered. The echo of the glass was the same echo that resonated in his head, and then he understood everything. The business trip, the night Zola stayed alone at home, his father's insistence that everything would be fine, Zola's expression weeks later when something inside her had changed, the silent rejection, the distance, the constant sadness. Kofi was breathing with difficulty, as if the very air was betraying him. He walked to the bathroom, washed his face, looked in the mirror, and didn't recognize himself. In his reflection wasn't the elegant man who used to control everything with a smile. There was a betrayed son, a blind husband, a defeated human being. He took his keys, went downstairs, and walked through the marble hallways without greeting anyone. His mother called him from the living room, but he didn't answer. He crossed the door to Sterling Dumont's study without knocking. The patriarch was standing, pouring himself whiskey as if the world owed him reverence. He looked up calmly. "You have no manners, son." Kofi closed the door. The tension in the room was so thick it felt physical. "What did you do to her?" Sterling didn't answer. "I'm going to repeat it only one more time. What did you do to Zola?" The silence was long, arrogant. Then Sterling took a sip from his glass and spoke with chilling serenity. "Everything I've given you, I did to tame you. You were always weak, Kofi. You weren't born to lead this family. You lacked character. You had too many emotions." Kofi took a trembling step toward him. "You drugged her. You touched her when she couldn't defend herself. Is that what you did?" "Don't raise your voice! Answer me!" Sterling looked at him without flinching. "She was just another pawn. I wanted to show you that you can't trust anyone, not women and not your judgment. And I succeeded, because you failed, as always." Kofi staggered backward as if he'd been punched in the chest. He felt sick. Repulsion. His own father had destroyed the woman he loved just to humiliate him. "You're sick. I'm in control. What's the difference? You're not in control of anything, because I'm going to sink you with everything you are, with everything you represent." Sterling let out a short, dry laugh. "And you think people are going to believe you, a spoiled boy, over me? Do you know how many judges owe me favors? How many media outlets depend on my money?" Kofi clenched his fists. "Well, they are going to find out everything, because I will speak." He left. He didn't look back, didn't listen to the threats. He slammed the door and rushed out as if the mansion had turned into a fiery cage. When he arrived in the neighborhood where Zola lived, he didn't know whether to knock or simply kneel. Mrs. Coretta opened the door with suspicion. "What are you doing here?" "I need to speak with her. She doesn't want to see you or hear you, and she's right." Kofi swallowed. His voice cracked. "Please." Mrs. Coretta hesitated, then stepped aside. Zola was in the room, feeding Kian. Seeing him, she stood up with the child in her arms. Her eyes filled with contained fury. "What are you doing here?" Kofi took a step, then stopped. He looked different. Defeated. "I came to ask for your forgiveness." "Your forgiveness is useless to me, Kofi. I know everything now. I heard the audio. I spoke with him. He confessed. What he did to you, what he did to me." He couldn't continue. His voice completely broke. Zola knew, without him needing to say more, but she couldn't allow herself to feel compassion. Not yet. "And now you come here to redeem yourself? After leaving me alone in a delivery room, after screaming at me in front of everyone, after allowing your mother to call me an opportunist, now you feel pain." "There's no excuse for any of that. I know, but I'm here because I want to help you. I want to help you and my son." Zola trembled. "He is not your son." "He is my son, even if he doesn't carry my blood, because what they did to him is unforgivable, and I won't stay silent." Zola collapsed onto the bed with the child in her arms. Cries poured out of her like a torrent, deep, tired, almost powerless. Kofi tried to approach, but she raised her hand. "Don't come near me. I need time." Kofi nodded. He left without saying more. Imani, the lawyer, was preparing the complaint. She knew she was challenging someone powerful, but she didn't care. The file was thick. It included medical exams, genetic tests, the recordings, Aaliyah's history, and indirect testimonies. "This is going to blow up, but you can't back down," she told Zola as they reviewed the documents. "I won't. They're going to attack you. They'll say you did it for money, for revenge, for fame." Zola looked her in the eyes. "I don't care what they say. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for all the ones who couldn't speak." The media found out. Some supported the complaint. Others ridiculed it. But the story began to gain traction. Several women started writing to Imani anonymously. They had worked in the homes of powerful families. Some recounted that Sterling Dumont had also harassed them, but they were too afraid to speak. The legal team filed the formal complaint. The press surrounded the courthouse. The photograph of Zola leaving with her son in her arms circulated on social media, in newspapers, and on television channels. Days later, Sterling sent a message. He wanted to speak with Zola privately. Imani forbade it, but Zola decided to go. They met at a private restaurant. He arrived with his usual elegance. She arrived with a serene but firm face. "You have guts," he said. "I have memory, and I have a son who deserves justice. That child is not my shield. He is my engine and the reflection of what you did. Like it or not, he is in your life forever now." Sterling looked at her for a long time, then smiled. "I can take the child away from you. I have the resources, the contacts, the lawyers. With a couple of signatures, I can get custody. I can argue that you have no means, that you have emotional instability. Do you really want to play this game?" Zola didn't flinch. "Try it, but I swear that if you do, I will make public every detail, every victim, every audio. You won't be able to walk down the street without people looking at you as what you are." Sterling picked up his glass, drank, then stood up without saying more. Kofi called a press conference. Imani, Zola, and other media outlets were present. Microphones, cameras, reporters. The world was watching. Kofi stepped up to the podium, took a deep breath, and spoke. "I come to speak as a son, as a husband, and as a victim of silence. The father of my wife's son is my own father, and it is not the first time he has done this." There was a collective murmur, shouts, camera flashes. What happened to Zola was an act of violence, of power, of perversion, and I, as part of that family, can no longer remain silent. The media exploded. Social media collapsed. Sterling Dumont's untouchable figure ceased to exist, and just like that, the silence was broken. Kofi's words still reverberated in the courthouse hallways, in the newsrooms, and on internet forums like a bomb no one saw coming. The image of the heir to one of the country's most powerful families confessing that his father had committed an unimaginable crime and that the child he himself had rejected was the result of that monstrosity crossed borders. It was international news, front pages, headlines, divided reactions. Some applauded his courage, others called him a coward for having been silent for so long. But Zola had no time to debate the media impact. She was focused on only one thing: justice. Together with Imani, her lawyer, she presented herself before the district attorney's office, accompanied by cameras, journalists, and several women who had also suffered, but hadn't dared to speak until now. Zola carried Kian in her arms as always. She was thinner, her face marked by exhaustion, but her eyes were alight. She was no longer afraid. She no longer hid. Imani filed the formal complaint against Sterling Dumont with all the legal backing possible. She included testimonies, documents, the genetic results, the filtered audio, and the recording of the confession Kofi had secretly obtained days earlier while speaking with his father. The evidence was clear. Although the law sometimes bent to protect the powerful, this time they were going to force it to look the truth in the face. The press conference was called at the courthouse entrance. Imani took the microphone while Zola held Kian. "Today, we are not only denouncing a crime, we are denouncing a structure of impunity that has protected a man for decades, a man capable of destroying entire lives with a smile. We will not be silent. We will not retreat." When Zola took the floor, the silence was absolute. For years, I believed I had done something wrong, that I deserved the rejection, the stares, the closed doors, but it was not my fault. And today, I want other women to hear this. It was not your fault either. He didn't just steal a life from me. He stole the possibility of being a mother with dignity. But he will not take away my strength. That same day, Imani presented a list of women willing to testify. Some were still afraid. Others didn't want to show their faces, but the stories matched. Repeated patterns, strange invitations, dizziness, memory blanks, confused awakenings, months of silence, all connected to Sterling Dumont, all rendered invisible by power. And then the unexpected happened. Aaliyah appeared, not as the cheerful young woman who had once worked at the mansion, but as a fragile figure with a pale face, short hair, and trembling hands. She had escaped the psychiatric hospital with the help of a nurse who decided not to remain complicit. Imani received her in her home, gave her clean clothes, and protected her as if she were her own sister. Zola hugged her with tears in her eyes. Aaliyah didn't speak for a long time, but when she finally did, her voice, broken but firm, made everything tremble. "He locked me up so no one would know. He told me that no one would believe me, that I was crazy, and I started to believe him until I saw Zola on the news and understood that he kept destroying lives." With Aaliyah as a key witness, the prosecutor's office ordered Sterling's immediate arrest. The police arrived at his mansion with cameras rolling live. They brought him out in handcuffs, wearing dark glasses and an air of absolute disdain. He didn't resist. He looked at the journalists as if they were ants. Still, the moment was historic. A Dumont publicly arrested. But it didn't last. 72 hours later, he was released due to a legal technicality, alleged insufficient direct evidence. The presiding judge was an old acquaintance of Sterling Dumont. Social media exploded. Public opinion was divided between outrage and disbelief. Kofi shouted to the cameras that the system was corrupt, that if his father walked free, no one would be safe. Zola felt like the world was laughing in her face again. But this time, she didn't break down. She organized a march with Imani and the other victims. They didn't want only judicial justice. They wanted social justice. They wanted the entire country to look at that monster with his face uncovered. The march was called for the following Sunday. Women, mothers, daughters, activists, journalists, artists, thousands joined. Banners with sharp phrases, photos of victims, names that had been in the shadows for years. Zola marched at the front with Kian in her arms. She walked with tears in her eyes, but without lowering her head. The impact was immediate. Television networks broadcasted live. Several public figures spoke out. Local governments showed their support. For the first time, Sterling couldn't manipulate the narrative. People didn't believe him. Social media wouldn't shut up. The country was awake. But while the world watched, Kian worsened. The fever wouldn't go down. His body was weakening. He wouldn't eat. Zola rushed to the nearest hospital. Dr. Amadi received her. "We need to operate immediately." "How urgent?" "Hours. If we don't intervene, there could be irreversible damage." "I don't have the money. I only have $200 left. That's it." The doctor looked at her with compassion. "Then get it, any way you can." Zola ran out. She looked for Imani. They searched for foundations. None could respond so quickly. The hospital required a minimum deposit of $12,000. Desperate, Zola recorded a video. She didn't ask for money. She just told the story. She showed Kian, explained the urgency, and published it on social media. Within hours, people reacted. Anonymous individuals, celebrities, artists, mothers, students. A wave of solidarity activated. The story was already too well known. They couldn't allow Kian to pay with his life for what another man had done. The campaign went viral. In less than 24 hours, the account raised more than $70,000. Kofi, upon hearing the news, sold his stake in a tech company he had founded years ago. He handed over the money without announcing it, without cameras, without pretense. "Do what you have to do," he told Imani. "I just want the child to be well." Zola, upon finding out, didn't say anything. She remained silent, but there was something new in her eyes. Not trust, not love, gratitude. The operation was a success. Kian responded well. Doctors reported that with continuous treatment, he could lead a stable life. It wouldn't be easy, but there was hope. That night, Zola fell asleep in the hospital chair with Kian's hand in hers. She dreamed of a quiet house, of laughter, of a simple life. For the first time, she dreamed without fear. But the monster hadn't disappeared. Sterling, since his release, had been pulling strings. He knew his time was running out, that the pressure was increasing, that the system no longer had his back as before. He organized his escape. He obtained fake documents, a land route to another country, private bodyguards. He planned everything with surgical precision. It was his style to do everything in silence, without noise, without leaving traces. What he didn't know was that his own son, Kofi, had placed a private investigator behind him. They were tracking his movements, waiting for the exact moment to intervene. The alert reached Imani. Imani called Zola. Zola called the police. The plan was simple. Sterling would leave the country that night. He would fly abroad using a false identity. The airport was the key point. They had to act there, 1 hour before boarding. Zola didn't hesitate. She took a cab and went to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. She didn't notify the press. She didn't seek a spectacle. Only justice. She found him in the VIP line with a fake passport and 2 bodyguards. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You," he said with arrogance. Zola didn't respond. She turned around, and then 2 police officers, a judge, and a prosecutor arrived. Sterling Dumont was formally detained for attempted flight, document fraud, and violation of conditional release. "You won't get out so easily this time." He smiled one last time. "The world is full of traitors." Zola stared at him. "No, it is full of women who stopped being afraid." And just like that, the monster fell. Sterling Dumont was handcuffed in front of cameras, surrounded by security agents and witnesses of his downfall. His gaze, for the first time, was no longer arrogant. It was empty. No power protected him anymore. His world, built on fear, manipulation, and silence, collapsed with the force of a truth he couldn't crush. The entire country watched, some with disbelief, others with relief, many with fury. It was the end of an era where the powerful could trample others without consequences. Justice was finally walking without being sold. The trial was long, public, and televised. Dozens of witnesses, experts, doctors, psychologists, journalists, women. Voices that had been buried for years came to light with the trembling of those who don't know if they will be believed, but with the courage of those who can no longer remain silent. Among them, Aaliyah. Her testimony paralyzed the room. She spoke with a shaky but clear voice. She described the hell with details no one could ignore. Every word was a slap to the system. Zola also testified. She held Kian in her arms as she spoke. She didn't dramatize. She didn't cry. She spoke as a mother who was no longer afraid. She told everything from the day she woke up confused to the moment she heard the audio where her own voice was begging for help. She recounted how the Dumont family accused her, abandoned her, and humiliated her. She looked at every judge, every lawyer. She didn't ask for compassion. She demanded justice. The verdict came after weeks of deliberation. Sterling Dumont was declared guilty of multiple felonies, including aggravated assault, coercion, evidence tampering, fraud, and attempted flight. The sentence was clear: life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The country celebrated. Some voices still doubted, influenced by decades of media power, but the majority understood that something had changed, that it was no longer possible to remain silent when a single victim decided to speak. Candles were lit in public squares, scarves were hung on balconies. Zola wasn't the only one who won. Everyone won. Kian, meanwhile, was recovering. The operation had been successful. His small body responded well to treatment. The doctors were optimistic. Kofi visited him every day. He didn't talk much. Sometimes he just sat beside him, took his small hand, and watched him sleep. It was his way of asking for forgiveness, not with words, but with presence. Zola noticed it. She also noticed that he was no longer the same. The arrogant, distant, controlling Kofi of the mansion had disappeared. What remained was a man who was broken but willing to rebuild himself from the ruins. One morning, when Kian was about to be discharged, Kofi asked to speak with her alone. They sat on a bench facing the hospital garden. The air smelled of wet earth and forgotten flowers. "I know I can never erase what I did to you," he said, looking down. "You can't," Zola replied firmly, "but I want you to know that I'm not leaving. Not as a couple. I'm not here to get that back. But as someone who understands the damage he caused and is willing to live with the weight of that damage for the rest of his life." Zola watched him for a long time, then sighed. "Sometimes forgiving is letting go, and I don't want to carry you anymore, not out of hatred, but because I want to walk lightly." He nodded. He didn't insist. And she hugged him briefly, like someone saying goodbye to something that was important but no longer belongs. With Kian's health stabilized and Sterling's sentence final, Zola decided it was time to do something more. She couldn't allow her story to become just another case that time erases. She had to tell it, not for herself, but for those who couldn't. She began writing, at first on loose sheets of paper. Then Imani gave her a hardcover notebook. Fill it with what broke you, and also with what saved you. Zola titled the manuscript with the name that had accompanied her since the first time she felt something was wrong: The Son of Silence. The book was published 6 months later. It was edited by a small, independent, Black-owned press. At first, they didn't expect much impact, but on the day of its launch, Zola's name trended everywhere. The book sold out in a few hours. Reviews called it brave, necessary, heartbreaking. It wasn't a story written to move people. It was a warning, a testimony, an act of remembrance. With the royalties, Zola founded an organization for women victims of abuse and power violence. She called it the Keon Foundation, not just for the child, but for what he represented, a life born from horror that became a symbol of hope. It offered free legal aid, emotional recovery workshops, temporary shelter, and medical guidance. Women arrived from everywhere, fearful, wounded, but with the certainty that they were no longer alone. Aaliyah was one of the first volunteers. Imani became her legal ally. Mrs. Coretta became a kind of honorary godmother. Kofi collaborated silently, organizing donations, using his contacts without seeking the spotlight. Zola became a public figure despite not wanting to. She was invited to conferences, universities, and television shows, but she only accepted when she knew she could speak with sincerity, without makeup, without prefabricated speeches. Her story wasn't a product. It was an open wound that she had decided not to hide anymore. Years passed. Kian grew up surrounded by love. He didn't ask much at first. He was a curious, happy child with a contagious laugh and a precocious intelligence. He knew his story was special, that his mother was strong, and that somehow his existence had changed the lives of many people. When he turned 6, Zola wrote him a letter. "My dearest son, you were born in silence, but your voice has woken the world. I didn't raise you to be brave, because you already are. I raised you to be free, to understand that your origin doesn't define you. What defines you is the love you gave and received, and you, Kian, have been my greatest lesson in love." The last scene took place on a warm March afternoon. The sky was a clean, almost unreal blue. Zola walked along a path surrounded by trees with Kian in her arms. He was no longer a baby, but he liked to hug her like when he was small. She lifted him, propped him on her hip, and looked at the sky. She didn't say anything for several seconds. Kian stroked her face. "Are you okay, Mom?" She smiled, not with sadness, but with peace. "The pain broke me, but you rebuilt me." And they kept walking. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.